Okay, we're looking at the Great Depression and what is it? When did it start? So we're looking at economic growth after World War One, 1919, where the United States is going to grow and have its economy grow at almost unparalleled times. It was an amazing time frame. The economy grew, people came home from the war, families, people got married, families grew, things were good, and that's going to stay that way. Though there are some indicators in the 20s that show us that this is kind of being a false um, economy being supported by the government. Things are going to be good in the 1920s for Americans economically, and home ownership is going to grow, businesses are going to grow, people are going to make money, and we start to see some signs where the wheels on the bus are falling off, um, but it won't officially start until 1929. Some say it starts in August of 1929 when we have a double quarter dip in GDP, gross national product. But most would say it officially starts with the crash of the stock market in 1929, October of 1929, and then it'll last until the start of World War II. Some of the causes of what happened and when the stock market or of the Great Depression, as mentioned, for our purposes, we're going to just say that the stock market is the official start of the Great Depression. And that was where we had people investing money that truly didn't know what they were doing, and we had people that were not regulating it, the market, with caution. You could be investing in it and not paying the full amount of your cost to buy in for stock. And there were practices going on that were just simply unsound, debt that wasn't really truly being accounted for. And when you had that, you set yourself up for potentially some really bad things to happen. And that's exactly what happens in the stock market. The average person was investing well and way above what they could afford to lose. And when it went south, a lot of people will lose their fortunes in the stock market. The other one that really hit was, in addition to the stock market and no regulations in that, we had a bunch of banks that were lending money that were bad loans, whether it be to individuals or to banks or excuse me, to companies, and those will all fold, and there will be a panic. So when people start to lose their money in the stock market, and that they'll see that they'll start to make a run on the banks, they'll want to get their money, and then banks did not have that money, they had to lend it out to bad investments, and so they couldn't get the money back, so they had to forfeit people's accounts. That even made more people make a run on banks. So unregulated business practices and lending practices, the fact that our agricultural market with the Dust Bowl that's going to hit in the Midwest in 1930 is going to cause the agriculture to default on many of its loans. Individual people's consumer debt was at an all-time high. These are things that are happening today. These are not, they're similarities to us being $22 trillion in debt and the people of 1920s having loans on, houses and cars and lawnmowers and things like that you never had happened before. And we have some of those same things happening today. So there are some similarities there. And then once this thing starts, consumers' confidence in the economy and in our government's it's gonna dwindle. They are not going to believe and invest and be willing to invest some of the gold that they had saved on their own or money. And then the drought conditions of the United States is going to contribute heavily to the Great Depression. Farmers couldn't grow anything, and they had been growing the same crops in the same fields, year after year because the government was guaranteeing them price on their wheat, and so um, it stopped raining. We just had a drought in our economy, or in our um, country, for better part of 8 years, 10 years. So let's take a look at it. The president in 1928 was elected, was a guy by the name of Herbert Hoover. He was a Republican who had served in previous administrations. He's a smart guy. He's gone to Stanford. He's been around for a long, long time. He's served under three different presidents, and he's seen the economic boom. And he's going to think that yes, the economy's got a hiccup. We've hit a bump, but he won't see it or know how bad it was until many would say it was too late. He believed that the role of government was to foster cooperation between competing interests or between the society and government, but he never ever felt that the government's role was to run the economy. He much like most people that time frame, and this is the backbone of America, is this rugged individualism, this Protestant work ethic, where you got up in the morning and you worked hard, and then you went to work the next day, and then when you were doing play, what you did is you worked. And that was not only his idea, but it was most Americans. Most Americans, and Hoover himself, were opposed to any kind of federal welfare. He believed that if you start giving out money to your citizens, that you're going to end up enabling people, and that once you're on welfare, you're never going to get off it. And I think there's an argument for that today. When you've had people that have been on some kind of government assistance for years and years, and sometimes generations. Hoover was opposed to it. Most Americans were opposed to it. He believed that if times got tough and problems came, that individual families themselves were responsible for helping each other out, or local charities, churches, but never government. That was not going to be their role. So when things start to go south, and that he's going to be very slow to react. When it first hits, he gets the business leaders in all three of these areas, business, banking, and labor, and says, okay, here's what we want to do. And most people agreed with him. He asked the employers, don't cut wages or lay off workers. This is in an unprecedented slip in our economy, but let's not push the panic button. And he turned back to the labor leaders and said, guys, this is not the time frame that we're going to go on strike or we're going to demand higher wages. And he looked towards churches and organizations to raise money to help the people that were out of jobs. Remember, the Great Depression is going to come. You're going to have an unemployment rate between 25 and 50% of everybody out in the workforce not working. The problem with what Hoover did was it was so severe, the economy was so bad that people had lost so much that none of these small differences made a change, and people became more desperate and became more frightened of it. And when you had that happen, people started to blame and started to look for something to come about that would save them. As a result, in the 1932 election, the Republicans got their clocks cleaned by the Democrats. The Democrats are going to take control of the House of Representatives, and people are going to, 1928, Democrats are going to take control of the House of Representatives. And frustration is going to set in, and pretty soon people are starting to blame the government and the president. You know, the buck stops with the president, and he's the top of the food chain. So when things would not get better, they started blaming him for everything. The Hoovervilles. These are these vacant lots. Everybody was losing their homes. They couldn't make the payments on their homes, so they were repossessed. And people were having to live anywhere they could, and they would take anything they could. cardboard or pallets, and they would make them into little tiny, basically homes, small little tiny homes, whether it was a pallet or a cardboard box, anything of wood. They would make these in vacant lots. And newspapers were used for the homeless, and they were called Hoover blankets. And so you had Hoovervilles, little towns made of cardboard and vacant lots, and then you had Hoover blankets that was newspaper, and then you had people that when they would, the newspaper or prominent people would come out to see what it looked like, they would actually turn their pants, the pockets inside out, and they call those Hoover flags. So by 1932, things were looking rather dim for Mr. Hoover and the Republicans. Before that, though, Hoover will eventually make a move in the 1930s where he's going to put people back to work, and the federal government's going to start doing some projects. One of them is he's going to build the Boulder Dam on the Colorado River between Nevada and Arizona, and he's going to employ a bunch of people. This is a change in the mindset. The Republicans have never done this, and where in the Constitution does it allow you to do this? So people are saying, wait, government's taking too much of a control here. He takes and authorizes an emergency fund to give back to banks and to life insurance companies and railroads and other key industries to get these industries back on their feet, back and running, to give some kind of air of normality, but it's too little and too late. And then a really big thing that's going to hit against him, it's going to seal his fate, and we're going to stop here in just a second, is the bonus army. So let's take a break here for just a second. I'll pause it here and turn your books and take a look at what the bonus army was on page 434 and 435. All right, so we're back, and we're getting to 1932, and the election for the presidency is coming about. And as I mentioned, people were desperate, and they were blaming Hoover. And the Democrats have an opening. Franklin Roosevelt, who's a politician, a two-term governor from New York, and a really, really good statesman and a great politician, great sense of humor, could relate to the average person, runs for the Democratic Party, and he wins in a convincing victory. I mean, it's a slaughter of the Republicans. Congress, 2/3 of all of the Senate, so you're looking at 75 senators, and 3/4 of all of the House of Representatives went to the Democratic Party. So when you have that kind of majority, that kind of a mandate, you can do virtually anything you want. And that's exactly what Roosevelt will do. He's going to try to have the federal government alleviate a lot of this suffering that the Great Depression had brought upon the American people. And he's going to call this government program the New Deal. And the New Deal is going to have all kinds of different programs, which we'll look at again in the next lecture. But the three main goals of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal were relief for the needy. I got to get people back to work. I got to get people fed right away. I got to get people. I got to take care of immediate needs, because people are dying left and right around us, and people are being kicked out of their homes. So that's the first thing. Then the economic recovery for businesses and for banks. He's going to do that. And then the third one is financial reform. He's going to make it where we never will have this happen again, or try to make it where we're never going to have this happen again. So those are the three main goals of the New Deal, and I'd make sure I know those. Any president that gets elected, the most important thing they're going to do is in their first 100 days of their administration. That's when you're going to try to pass. That's when you're going to have probably the best approval. You've just been elected. If you're going to get something in, you're going to get it in that first little bit. And President Roosevelt is going to hit the ground running. He's put in office. It's different Today you go into office in January. You're sworn in. Back then it was March, and he's going to go in March 9th, and it's going to last until June 16th. And he's going to pass 15 major pieces of legislation that are going to, again, try to get us back on our feet and get Americans back to work, get Americans back believing in our country and our government and each other. So first thing we're looking at is he's going to reform the banking and financing. We've had a huge, as I mentioned already, number of banks that have failed, and there's an incredible panic. People have lost everything. They go to the banks and they can't get their money back. So FDR, when he comes into office, he's sworn in. He makes a federal holiday on March 5th, right away, one day after taking office. He says, next day, all banks are going to be closed. And after he comes into that place, he's going to impose the very first thing that they're going to pass right away through is called the Emergency Banking Relief Act. And this is going to be where the Treasury Department is going to look at the health of every bank in the country, and those that were sound and could reopen and pay back the people their money, they let them open. Those that weren't able to pay back their people, they kept them closed, and then the federal government gave them money so that they could pay back people at least a portion of the money they had in their savings accounts. Because all these people had money in the savings account. When things started to go south, they would make a run. They would go to the banks to get their money out. It's called a run on the banks. And the banks actually don't have your money sitting in there. They lend it out to other people and to other businesses. Ooh. And let me see here, guys. I thought I had one more in here. I guess I don't. In our next slide, or our next lecture, I should say, we're going to take a deeper look at the New Deal. And the New Deal is the program that he's going to continually refer to, and he's going to have all kinds of different specific things for the federal government to try to help those three areas. You know, he's going to help the needy. He's going to get businesses back working, and he's going to stop this thing from ever happening again. But one of the things that FDR does that is unique is because he has the power of radio, he's going to do these fireside chats, they call it. And he's going to come over the airways, and he's going to give a update and a speech to the American public, much like President Obama was the first to use email on a massive scale, and President Trump is the first one to use the Twitter and that to reach out to people. He was the first one to use the radio with the American public. And he had a great, as I mentioned before, he's got a great voice and a great calming effect that people would tune in every 2 to 3 weeks or weekly to hear his fireside chat. And one of the great quotes that he says as we enter into World War II is, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." And saying the meaning of that is, if you allow yourself to continually go down the path of everything's going bad, we're going to die, it's never going to get better, you're feeding that, and it's just going to get worse. So let's stop there, and we'll look at the New Deal programs here in our next lecture.